Good morning. How's everybody doing? My name is Jared Simmons. I'm here with my colleague, fellow principal at Outlast Consulting, Hung Nguyen, and we are excited about the opportunity to talk to you today about a program we're launching called Coaches of Color. Now, a few ground rules. I am a coach. I'm a consultant. I am not a presenter. So what I like to do is make things a conversation. So if you would like to share a challenge or offer up a thought to us live here on the air, please let Hung know in the chat, and she will be able to send you some info to allow you to actually jump in and talk with us live. Um, Beyond that, please be very active in the chat. Share your thoughts and comments and perspective there. Let's make this a conversation, and most importantly, a comfortable space where we can all just be together and talk about a challenge that we don't get to talk about every day. In this context. This is a launch party. It's an opportunity to talk about this program, but most importantly, it's an opportunity for us to connect and to share ideas and thoughts on how we can start to make progress on this massive challenge we have before us as a community and as a corporate society. So, with all of that being said, I'll introduce myself a bit, and then I'll throw it over to Hung and have her introduce herself, and then we'll dive right in. So my name is Jared Simmons. I am an engineer by training, graduated from the University of Alabama, Roll Tide, and spent some time at Procter and Gamble and a firm called McKinsey and Company, and a little time at Coca-Cola before striking out on my own 5 years ago to start Outlast Consulting. And what Outlast Consulting is intended to do is sort of be the home for professional development and innovation thinking. We partner with companies of all sizes to help them tackle their toughest business challenges. Coaches of Color was born of the lived experience that I'd had in the corporate world, and the opportunity to step outside of that corporate structure to create something that could help the folks that were still in it was a huge opportunity for us to be able to tackle. I saw that, Steve. Thank you for that. So we're really getting started, just at the beginning of getting started on this program, and what we want to do is share where we are, and talk about a little bit about what prompted the program, and get into some good conversations about what we can do to help each other immediately, as in right now, and then moving forward. So, Hung, if you'd like to introduce yourself, that would be great.
Sure thing, Jared. Thank you. And first of all, thank you for everybody who is joining. We're really excited to launch Coaches of Color. And before we get in, I'll give a quick intro of myself. I grew up here in Houston, Texas, and that's where I am now. I concentrated in psychology and economics at Harvard. I've always been very interested in people, decision-making, and why people do what they do, and why they don't do what they do. So after undergrad, I worked a bit in brand management at General Mills before going to business school, and also working at McKinsey. That's where Jared and I met and worked together. After leaving McKinsey, I worked for 10 years at BP in oil and gas, and recently left BP because I wanted to more closely align my personal passions and purpose to my professional life, and hence joining Jared at Outlast Consulting and focusing on professional development with a bent on people of color and diverse talent. So really excited about all the exciting things that we have in store. and am really looking forward to interacting with folks live. And hopefully, this can be a useful time to not only the live guests, but also the folks calling, listening in as we unpack challenging situations at work. Um, Quick plug, please feel free to use the chat to comment, ask follow up questions, and click on the emojis to give real time feedback. I will probably be spending most of the time in the role of producer and answering the online chat on the that side, or that side. My camera is mirror imaged. And Jared will spend time talking live to folks, and we'll tag team this through. Really, really excited and looking forward to this session. So I'm glad that you're here and joining us on this wonderful purpose driven journey. Back to you, Jared.
Thanks, Hung. That was a great intro. And Hung is a great person and a wonderful partner in this process. She's, as you heard, she's very accomplished, and for her to join us to bring this to life is has been just a wonderful wonderful thing. So thank you, Hung, for for joining us. So let's dive right in. I'm going to tell you a bit about Coaches of Color, if that's okay. So Coaches of Color is a service line. Where we're starting is with coaching for employees. That's where we're going to start, and that's what we're going to talk about today. Employees of color, providing them with the coaching and support they need to be successful in this environment. Now, from there, we're going to go to stakeholders. So a lot of people, as we've been talking about this problem and this solution we're developing, have asked, "Oh, well, are you going to do something to help majority folks who want to be allies and or people who need some coaching on how to best interact with people of color from a leadership perspective, from a management perspective?" That's coming. We're that's where we're headed next. And then the third space that we're going to move into, likely in parallel, is coaching diverse suppliers. So suppliers who work with Fortune 500 companies or aspire to work with Fortune 500 companies, those founders of color, CEOs of diverse businesses. We are going to leverage our McKinsey experience to provide them with strategy, advice on how to structure and organize their conversations with large companies, how to be more effective at landing and securing and resecuring the business with large companies. So those are the three sort of areas of Coaches of Color as it's laid out today. Again, today we're going to talk about what I feel like is closest to my heart and the most critical piece: getting employees of color in large companies the support they need on an individual basis. So any questions or thoughts on that are more than welcome, and we'll dive in to sort of unpacking what we're going to do in that space. So, Hung, any questions or thoughts in that arena in the chat?
No, no,
Okay,
not yet. I think that we can move on a little bit and talk through the coaching of colors framework, the origin of the idea.
perfect. Yes. So the origin of the idea is rooted in a few basic insights. One is that the current, as we think about the way Fortune 500 companies solve this problem today, and the problem being succinctly that people of color aren't advancing through the ranks, aren't having the careers that they want and deserve, and the way that problem is being solved today is not different from the way it was solved in the 80s. So the current approach is it's decades old and fundamentally insufficient when you look at the numbers. If you look at the statistics from a 2018 survey of people of color, it shows clearly that 98% of companies have a diversity program, but only 28% of those folks feel that that they benefit from it directly as an individual. So I don't know about you, but I can't think of many things that a company does has done the same way for 40 years and has this type of perceived benefit, that benefit, or that they would deem successful, or or as working. Now, I'm not saying that the current approach, diversity, diversity teams, diversity managers, and the like. I'm not saying that those things are wrong or broken. I'm saying that they're insufficient, and we're not here to be a different approach. We're here to be an additive solution, one that is able to uh, start to tackle the what we call the invisible labor associated with this problem. So most diversity initiatives, most employee resource groups may be headed by a few people in a diversity organization, but they are run by people of color in that organization. They're the committees, they're the people putting on the events, they're the people designing it, working to pull these annual conferences off, things like that. And that has a hidden cost. And so when we start to really unpack what that might mean, in terms of impact on people's careers, on their mental health, on their personal lives, um, having to compete with their counterparts in their day to day work, and then also having to carry the additional invisible labor of pulling off these events, that is something that might contribute to that 98-28 disparity we saw in the numbers. So at the end of the day, when I think about coaching as a profession and as a practice, coaching in the world of coaching, context is as important as content. So as we start to unpack that, how is it possible to create the context of being a person of color in a conversational one-on-one environment, if you haven't had the lived experience of being a person of color? Now, that is something that I really believe is not 100% required to be helpful. Um, for a coach to be helpful, it's not 100% required, but it is. I have found it to be an accelerator of the depth of relationship that's needed to really do the coaching, the effective coaching on a professional development level that's needed. Um, so those are the insights that really prompted the development of coaches of color, and really, are at the core of what we're trying to eliminate. So we're trying to reduce that invisible labor. We're trying to modernize the approach in a supplementary way. Um, I think those are the kind of, and we're trying to deepen the context to really make professional development more impactful, specifically for people of color. You can't really, um, it's hard to unpack and work through a problem with a coach if you're not comfortable talking about it with that coach, or if you feel like that coach doesn't fully understand it. So we're trying to take those kinds of limits off the coaching relationship, so that it can be truly impactful for everyone. So with that, Hung, do we have folks that would anyone that would like to join us, a guest?
Yes. Before we go there, there was a couple of comments that were really astute on the chat.
Hmm.
One being that diversity programs have benefit and they're great for connectivity and making friends, but not necessarily effective in advancing people of color. So I think that that's a good insight to highlight.
That's a great point. Yes, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was going to jump right into it and bring
Yeah,
in our first guest if we're good with it.
I just want to make
So
one quick comment on that comment,
yeah,
and I think that's the distinction between community and capability building. And I think what people are asking the diversity programs to do right now is build community and build capability at the same time. And I don't think it's designed to do that. And so I fully agree with Trevor. That's a astute observation. That it is coming up. They do tend to come up short in that space.
Wonderful. Ready to jump in with our first guest?
Yes, excited.
So, our first guest is Jessica from Brooklyn, New York, and she wants to talk about unconscious bias. So, Jessica, you're live.
Hi, Jessica.
Hi, Jared. Hi, Hung. Thank you for taking my question. I am in Brooklyn, New York, and my question is I'm a Black woman in tech,
Hmm,
and I want to understand how I can better thread the needle to navigate or to minimize kind of potential workplace biases that my counterparts may have, or supervisors, or other leadership um, officials have. So, what can I do to like minimize that as I try to grow my career?
sure. How? So, are you just a couple of context questions, if I can ask? So, how have you? How do you engage with your manager? Do you have a sort of a routine or standing approach to connecting with your manager on a regular basis?
Yes, my direct supervisor is incredible, and I think most often in most of my roles, I have had a candid relationship. I wouldn't
Right.
say 1,000% trust right
Sure.
there. That takes time, but
Yes.
we've been very clear on expectations, understandings. I'm thinking about as I move outside of the concentric circles where I'm not necessarily dealing with my direct supervisor who knows my work output, who understands my intentions, right? It's about those perceptions outside of
Sure.
that smaller team or that core team. How can I minimize that or think about how to ensure that I'm being perceived the way that I want to be perceived versus, right, how they
Mhm.
want to prejudge me because I look a certain way or act
Right.
a certain way.
Right. No, I can I can relate to that. So I think one thing that could be helpful is to think about how you establish sort of in some companies they call it a platform. So people tend to be very presumptuous and put people in boxes. Just human, it's human nature. It's how we survived, right? And so I think the key is to give people something to think about you before they choose something to think about you. So, what do you want to be known for? How do you want to be perceived from a business impact standpoint? And what role do you want to play in sort of creating the company, moving the company forward? The example I could give is um, when I was at Procter and Gamble, there was, there were folks in the research and development organization who were known for specific things, and so um, I developed a reputation for modeling. So, oh, this is the guy that does consumer modeling, or this is the guy that does whatever. And so, if you can develop some sort of platform that sort of precedes you, I think that's important. I also think um, staying, positive and assuming positive intent is important as you start to widen the concentric circles, because I've seen people, sort of overcorrect um, in those situations because of concerns about that. I really those are the kind of the two things that come to mind right away. Do you have a sort of a network of folks that you plug into?
No, I don't. So I'm in a new role, and I will say, or Jared, if I can push back, right?
Yeah,
I often hear the community building ask, or the statement to go network and meet more people of color, or et cetera.
sure,
And I think most of us are probably been on the job. We're not straight out of college,
of
obviously,
course,
right?
of course.
Where we know it doesn't. Sometimes it doesn't really matter all the connections that we have, right?
Hmm.
It tends to be who the highest person that sometimes that helps you, right, create that. So
Sure.
um, I don't have a network just yet. I hear your suggestion of like being able to have a reputation that precedes. But are there any other tips or advice, especially if I'm near in a role or in an organization, because I've switched organizations recently, that to help decrease that, or is it just something to just not think about and only deal with when it happens?
I think I don't think it's kind of like the purple elephant, right? I don't think you can ever tell someone, just don't think about the fact that you might be being perceived in a certain way. That's just not fair. Right. But I do think when I mention networks, I'm thinking about in terms of infusing your reputation into the organization, building your network strategically, not necessarily around who can pull you up, but around who can start to talk about who Jessica is in that context. And so making those connections in the different cross-functional organizations you want to have influence in, if there's a person you can have a virtual coffee with, or set up a chat with, so that they get to know you as a person and who you are, then you're planting that seed proactively within that organization, so that down the road, if those biases come up, there's someone in that conversation that those folks trust that can say, oh yeah, no, I know Jessica, she's the modeling person, she's the XYZ person, she's good, she's great. Because that's what turns a perceived bias into an eccentricity. uh, a lot of times, I got a lot of feedback for being quiet, not talking much. You need to speak up more in meetings. I got promoted, and then suddenly it was, oh, I'm a thoughtful person who thinks first and then speaks second. You know what I mean? So it's not about changing who you are and how you operate. It's just about kind of seeding that thought process in those other places.
Yeah, thank you. That's a really great way to help me understand that feedback and that advice. And so it's more so as I've thought about what I want my brand to be. It's almost like I'm creating some mini influencers who are going to repeat and spread the word, right? And in the conversations that I'm not included in, right, when I'm not in the room, I can have some proponents on my behalf. They're saying, "Oh no, I know Jessica. She's the person who does this," or "No, her work is excellent," to kind of help squash that.
Exactly. You try to nip it in the bud. You can't stop it from germinating, but you can stop it from growing into something that could impact your career.
Wow, that's great. Thank you. I think that answers my question, Jared.
Oh, perfect. Anything else?
No, I think that's great. Excited to attend the kickoff here.
Perfect. Good to see you. Take care.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Jessica. Thanks for being our first guest.
Yeah.
So I hope you have a great day, and happy Jackie Robinson Day. So Jared, our next guest is Aparna from California. She wants to have a conversation and explore the idea of being intentional about your career path. Aparna, you're on live.
Hi, Aparna. How are you? Can you hear me?
If you close out of your LinkedIn tab, it will cancel the second audio, the feedback loop.
Can you hear me now? I think we're...
Hello, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you now, Aparna.
Oh,
great.
Okay, great. Sorry, I had two audio streams going, tech issues.
No worries. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me, both of you. I really value this opportunity.
Yes. What can we talk about today?
So my question, Jared, is around planning a pathway to becoming an executive. So I'm at the director level currently in a tech company, and I want to, in 3 to 5 years, be closer to the executive suite, or
Sure.
at least moving up to like the VP level, et cetera, and planning my way to the executive suite.
Sure.
And I know as a woman of color, I do struggle with advocating for myself sometimes. It's something I'm very conscious of, but still, I think especially with this kind of jump from director to executive level, it takes a lot of intentionality and planning.
Right.
And so I wondered what your advice is on how you go about thinking about planning that pathway. So that includes getting promotions, getting raises, networking. What are your tips and thoughts about how to be very intentional about that 3-year or 5-year journey?
Sure. I think just asking the question is an important step. not kind of sitting back and just waiting for it to come meet you. I think that's important. We can't just do high quality work and expect things to flow from that. So first and foremost, understanding that it's going to take some separate and intentional attention to do that. That's well ahead of the game. I know there are a number of people who've made that transition in the chat, and I'm sure you'll see some good insights there as well. My thought on that is just the most important thing is just don't guess. So find someone who knows, not necessarily a person of color. Find someone who has made that leap, done it in that way. Find 3 or 4 people who've made that leap. I think the challenge is not allowing the perspective of one person to kind of define your approach. What you want to do is kind of talk to 3 to 5 people. I'm a market research guy. Talk to 3 to 5 people that have made that leap. What skills did they demonstrate? What outcomes did they demonstrate? How did they communicate those outcomes? How the process works. You'd be amazed at what you learn when you just ask someone. Just ask someone, what does it take to get promoted? How can I get promoted? And once they know that you want that's something you're looking for, you can use that to kind of change the way you get feedback. I think it's also very important to consciously, as you get the perspective from those 3 to 5 folks, consciously ask for specific feedback from people who are interacting with you on those traits that you've identified. Across these 5 people, these are the things that I saw that each of them had or demonstrated at some point. Find the people that watch you work, the people that see you work every day, and ask them specifically, hey, I'm going to start working on X. So when you see me in meetings, when you get emails from me, I'd love to check in with you once a month just to hear, just to see how I'm doing on this and get any thoughts you might have on how I could do it better. So just kind of taking a fact-based, as factual as promotions can be, sort of a fact-based approach would be my biggest piece of advice. Gather the information, synthesize it and create your plan based on that.
That's really helpful. And just like kind of one thought there. So I think that's really helpful because promotions can be specific to various companies. But are there any also generalized activities that you've seen that help? Like, for example, I guess you're really networking in a company, or I don't know, maybe speaking more at conferences, other generalized activities that you've seen across organizations that help get to that next level.
Sure. It's important that those things are sort of anchored in a specific, in a kind of theme that you're trying to build. Like we talked with Jessica in terms around I'll call it a platform. But you can't, if you're trying to be seen as a e-commerce expert, you can't go speak at a baker's conference. And you have to make sure that you're making those choices, elevating your presence, demonstrating your expertise in ways that align to a clear through line of a story that you want to tell about yourself, and you want other people to be able to tell about you. So speaking at conferences is great. Guest blog posts, being active on LinkedIn, all those things that you hear, they're great. They're very general, but the general advice is intended to be kind of leveraged in a very focused and specific way. And that's the difference between impact and just effort. So I would say start by figuring out what the core skills are to demonstrate to make that movement. Choose something you want to be known for, or a reputation you want to build, and then layer the speaking engagements, the blog posts, webinars, things like that. If you'd like to do a guest post on we have a blog called Outlast Insights. If you'd like to guest post there, let us know, and we'd be happy to get that up.
Yeah, that sounds great. Thank you. That's great advice.
Mm-hmm. Perfect. Anything else? What else?
I think that's it for me. I think that the key takeaways for me were like to be known for something, like have a theme or a platform, and be very intentional and like you said, talk to multiple people, not just one person, and get their advice on what it took for them to get to that next level and how they communicated that. I think the communication is also a key piece. It's not just doing the right things, but also storytelling that you did the right things.
Exactly. Hung,
Thank
do you
you.
have anything to add?
Yeah, no, I think that was a really great question, Aparna, and I think it resonates with lots of folks just because it's a question that's on our minds, but it's not something that we actively talk about, given whatever reason, whatever cultural hesitation or reason.
Mhm.
And I think that the key takeaway that I heard is just being very intentional because the person who is going to actually think the most and invest the most and care the most about your career is you. You know the most about what your strengths are, your opportunity areas, what you've done and what you haven't done. So if you don't lean into that, no one else actually can. Even with the best intentions, they actually can't.
Mhm.
So wonderful discussion. Thank you so much, Aparna, and I hope you have a great day. Thanks for joining us from sunny California.
Thanks so
Thank
much.
you both.
Take care.
Jared, I think it's time for us, since some people are coming in and coming out,
Okay.
for us to just take a quick, station identification break of sorts and do another quick highlight on either Coaches of Colors or even the framework, Think, Interact, Act framework that the
Sure.
Coaches of Color programs are based on.
Oh, yeah. No, that's a great call out. So, yeah, if you're just joining us, this is a live coaching sessions on Jackie Robinson Day in celebration of a launch of a program called Coaches of Color. And Coaches of Color is a one-on-one coaching program. A couple of key elements of it. Um, we start with an assessment. So the assessment aspect of it helps us understand how to engage effectively with the client, with the coachee. We move into goal setting, and then the actual coaching and support kicks in. And that coaching and support is done in the framework of our professional development framework called Think, Interact, Act. And really, that framework is aimed at making sure that you are thinking about things the right way from a strategic standpoint. The inner narrative. You're interacting with people. You're managing that dynamic and the dialogue and the interactions in an effective way that helps you be impactful externally, and then you're taking action that drives impact and improved outcomes. So that's the framework that we use. It's simple for a reason, so that we can improvise and tailor the experience to each person we coach. It happens on four different frameworks, four different types of coaching engagements. We have the guide level, we have the thought partner level, and then we have the advisor level. And those are our one-on-one relationships. We added a fourth based on feedback and conversations with uh, with 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 companies. We added the trainer level, which are webinars based on the Think, Interact, Act framework. So it's a one-on-one coaching platform or program uh, fueled uh, by the lived experiences of our coaches and the simple framework that we use to turn that into effective coaching to drive impact.
Wonderful. I think that we're ready to jump in. We have another guest. You ready for it, Jared?
I am excited.
Awesome. We have Allison from Texas with a question about water cooler chats and how something so innocuous can actually have very big impact to performance and mental well being. So, Allison, you are on live. Welcome.
Thank you, Hung. Thanks, Jared, for this opportunity. I really appreciate you guys taking the time to launch this wonderful program and help us out. I'm actually at work while I'm listening to you guys, and this is some very useful, compelling content, and I think your program is amazing. So I just can't wait to see more. But I just wanted to get some advice. I'm actually a contractor, and I'm seeking full-time roles. I want to get back into a permanent position in my particular area of discipline. But working in a large global corporation as a contractor, you have these interactions as if you're an employee. And I just don't want to cross any boundaries with having certain discussions. Like, I think I put an example about celebrity gossip and the situation with Meghan Markle that was a big worldwide phenomena. Personally, this is I'm just not into the celebrity arena. It's just not my thing.
Right.
But I don't want to come across as being not sociable and not willing to just have some water cooler chat and chat it up. But I just noticed in some of the discussions about it that some criticism and negativity that was said came, in my opinion, was based on racist stereotypes.
Mm.
So I think as a contractor, I'm kind of in a position where I'm not an employee, so I don't feel comfortable challenging anything that comes up. But I was able to just give my input based on my own personal taste and also based on, how I feel about the situation.
Sure.
So I'm just wondering, like, how do I approach that? Because I do want to become a permanent employee.
Right.
At some point, I don't want to offend anyone, but I do also have to protect my own mental health. And I just find that when these larger issues come up, not just with the Meghan Markle situation, but like the George Floyd, murder, and now we have another unarmed Black man who was murdered in Minneapolis. So how do I talk about these things? Because I don't feel comfortable being like a representative of what people should and shouldn't say. I don't feel comfortable trying to be the D&I representative and try to tell people what the correct behaviors are. I really just want to, do a great job, be as sociable and approachable as possible, but I do have some boundaries about certain things that are just, I guess, off limits for me.
Right. And you're entitled to those. I think it's a tough situation you're describing because you are in a position where I come into companies as a contractor as well, and it's very easy to get rid of a contractor, right? I mean, there aren't the same protections for contractors as there are for employees. So I definitely understand your dilemma. Yeah, I think the first thing is your concerns are your concerns, and they're valid, and you deserve every opportunity to create a space where you're comfortable coming to work. How to go about that is the tough part, obviously, and I think the approach I would recommend is to think about how to create how to find I won't say allies, but people in the organization who have been able to create that space, how they handle it, how some employees that you trust have built strong relationships with. Usually in a culture where those kinds of comments are being made, it's easier to identify people who have biases and these sorts of things. And so it's usually easier to find people who've developed a way of managing them because they're so overt. They've had to find a way to handle it, if that makes sense. And so kind of doing the research to find out, and these are deep trust relationships that you've built that you're leveraging, not emailing a random person to say, how are you handling this sort of thing, because that is something you don't want to you want to have a trust-based conversation with. So So I would say find the people around you that you trust and that you think will have similar boundaries to yours, and understand kind of their approach. And then I think there are ways to cut off the conversation in in those conversations, uh, in a constructive sort of boundary setting way that doesn't that isn't confrontational. Um, I've I've been in the room. I've worked in some very interesting environments in Southeast Alabama and in the construction industry and other places. I've heard some things firsthand, and so the what I tended to do. I was very young at the time. What I tended to do was um, just excuse myself from the conversation. Um, you know, pull my phone out of my pocket and stand up and walk out. Like just remove myself from that situation. And if you're comfortable over time, you can start to, you can say things like, oh, I'm not comfortable, in this conversation or things like that. I would also say, as you talk to employees, getting a feel for whether they have gotten support from someone internally, like a DNI, someone who's within HR or someone who's intended to sort of have support those conversations. But I would say just kind of explore those things and just feel comfortable finding ways to remove yourself from that situation, because you have to protect your boundaries. You have to protect your mental health, and it's your right, more than anything else.
Yeah, thank you. That's great confirmation, because I think what I did was finding myself doing was just pivoting the conversation and changing the subject, or even directing it more towards the mental health, because I didn't watch the interview. But I do know that there's a lot of mental health advocacy that came out of it. So I just
Mhm.
kind of directed my comments more towards the mental health. But yeah, I think I just don't want to come off as a snob, because I'm not a reality TV, celebrity royals person.
Right,
Like, I don't follow this stuff. I just find
right.
it to be distracting and not worth my emotional investment. But
Mhm.
I don't want to come off like some kind of elitist, like, oh my God, I can't believe you're talking about this at work type of person.
Right.
So yeah, I'm definitely comfortable with pivoting. And I do have some trusted people that I've built relationships with who actually work in the diversity space. So
Mhm.
the next time I do encounter something like this, I will make it a point to schedule time with them to get additional feedback on how they're handling it in their particular environment. So that's great advice. I really appreciate it, Jared.
Sure, sure. And
Allison,
sorry. Well, I was just gonna say one thing on the pivoting. Uh,
Mhm.
Pivoting and removing yourself from the conversation are two different things. Pivoting
Mhm.
puts a lot of pressure on you to
Uh-huh.
redirect an entire conversation. Uh,
Okay.
Removing yourself, I've found, has been lower effort. Uh,
Mhm.
and you can say that fight for another day. There's
Yeah.
sometimes when you just can't take on that emotional energy. You're
Mhm.
you're doing your job. You're doing what you do.
Yeah.
It's all incremental energy and effort. So I think
Yeah.
it's perfectly fine to just walk away from that.
Okay. I appreciate it.
Hmm.
Allison, one more thing to add is that as minorities, we're often the only person in the room of
Mhm.
that demographic or representation. And then so sometimes the majority thinks that, we represent all people who look like us and we are the expert of the entire, experience. And then sometimes the pressure is high for the actual minority to represent because they're the only one there's no other options. They can't shift it
Right.
to somebody else.
Right.
Mhm.
But I reiterate what Jared and you have been talking about in terms of it's not your responsibility. It's not part of your job description. You weren't hired in to do that. Your number one priority is yourself, your mental well-being, and two, your actual role and deliverables. If you choose and opt into engaging in that conversation, that's up to you. But you shouldn't feel obliged to comfort folks if they're uncomfortable, or educate folks if they are not aware of the situations. So yeah, that was my 2 bits.
Thank you, guys. Thank you so much. I'm sure more opportunities will come up for me to practice these skills that you now gives me. So I appreciate it.
Glad to do it. Great
All
to meet
right.
you, Allison.
Great meeting you
Thanks so
too.
much, Allison.
Okay, bye.
Bye. Hey, Jared, I have somebody else that I'm going to bring in, but it's going to take a couple minutes. So do you want to spend those couple minutes to talk through a bit about coaches of color?
Sure. I neglected earlier to talk a bit about Jackie Robinson and Jackie Robinson Day, so
Yes.
I might do that as well. So we're launching this program, Coaches of Color, on Jackie Robinson Day for some specific reasons. Jackie Robinson broke the color barrier in modern baseball in 1947. 2 years after the end of the World War, where people of color played a pivotal role in winning that war. But they came back to a country where there were still some very stark lines drawn. And Jackie Robinson broke a barrier in the American pastime, in the sport for the country at that time. And to do that, he had to bear a lot of he had to endure and take a lot of racism and abuse, which was outside of his character. If you know anything about Jackie Robinson and his story, he prided himself on reacting and responding to racist attacks, and chose actively for the 1947 baseball season to go outside of his comfort zone, outside of his personality, and do what it took for a bigger cause, the bigger cause of creating this opportunity for people to follow him. So a reporter called him in 1947, referred to him as the loneliest man in sports. And I think a lot of people of color in the current business world could probably relate to that. Being a person of color, even as companies communicate their percentages and their numbers, you don't get a feel for the absolute numbers. So saying 1% of our community, or 1% of our leaders are people of color, or 20% of our people of our organization is people of color, 40%, whatever the number is, that breaks down into an absolute number of human beings. And those human beings are distributed across a very large company and are often the only person of color in a number of situations. I worked for Fortune 500 companies, and every day I'd walk into a meeting where I was the only person of color on the team, or I was in a department where I was the only person of color. And these only situations are no less isolating and no less difficult today in 2021 than they were in 1947. And unfortunately, our solutions to the diversity problem are based more on the macro approach to move the numbers than the humanistic approach that really gets at what people feel and experience every single day when they come to work. So that's why we designed Coaches of Color to be a one-on-one coaching experience for people at all levels, people of color at all levels of the organization, because being the only person at any point is a burden that no majority person has to bear at any point in their career. So what we want to do is try to help people deal with that as effectively as we can, and come alongside and provide that support in a way that allows you to show up at work in the best way possible.
Agreed, Jared. I think that's a really good context of the origin story for coaches of color, why we wanted to do it, why we wanted to do it today, because of the significance of the day. And a couple of stats that I wanted to share was that there's been a lot of research, and folks know intellectually that companies with racially diverse executive teams, racially executive boards, are more likely to financially outperform their competitors. They're more innovative, they are faster, more agile. But that's a lot about the mind and, top line, bottom line. And it's unfortunately doesn't seem to be enough to move the needle, and we need to do more and identify and commit to more actionable tactics to actually move the needle a bit more. Another stat I wanted to share is that in 2019, 31% of US companies had no minority representation on their
Wow.
executive teams. So, despite all of the press, all of the public pledges, there hasn't been a lot of actual movement. Um, we celebrate when there is a new Black female CEO, but we don't see that it's kind of a leaky bucket. That there's usually only a handful, less than I don't even need to use my second hand to count the
Right.
number of minority CEOs. So it is we have a really really long way to go, and one other killer stat that I want to share because I researched them and I want to take credit for
These
sharing
are
them
great.
is that McKinsey study showed that it'll take 95 years for Black employees to reach talent parity, and this means 12% representation, which is the general population representation in the U.S. across all managerial levels. So this is around first level leaders, directors, VPs, execs, and C suite. So 95 years if we continue on the same trajectory of promotion, attrition, and recruiting. And there's a lot of emphasis on recruiting, but recruiting is not going to solve the problem because the broken rung is actually in the first step between individual contributors and early managers. If we don't fix that rung, the talent pipeline will not be fixed. Great. And our next guest is Trevor from New York City. And in the chat, he actually asked a very provocative question that I know is on lots of people's mind, but maybe we're not brave enough to ask. So thanks for the courage, Trevor. I'm going to turn Trevor on live to ask the question about, are some organizations just irredeemable?
Mm.
They're too far to save.
Well, now, I wasn't nervous before, but now I am. You said this is a provocative question.
No, I think it's a great question.
Welcome, Trevor.
I'm an introvert, so this is tough for me. I know.
But you're
Here
among,
we
We're
go.
all
you're
introverts.
among fellow. Yes, it's an
Yeah.
investment for all of us.
So this actually came up from a call that I had this week with a Black man who called me and wanted to set up time with me to understand about get my perspective on his promotion. I'm going to call it what it is, his promotion battle, right?
Mm.
And I listened to his story, and we can go through that if you want to. But as I was listening to it, I actually told him, I said, I'm furious right now listening to what you have gone through. And I was at a loss. He asked me, what do you think I should do? What should I be doing to improve my chances to advance? And I couldn't come up with anything beyond saying, you know what? You need to be confident in your value. You need to understand what that value is. And part of that includes looking at other organizations and including outside.
Right.
As a coach, so the question is, as a coach, how do you, and I'm not completely 100% certain I gave the right advice there. So how, as a coach, how do you know when to say, let's focus on some tactics, let's focus on development, let's focus on networking, rather than saying, you know what, it's time for you to consider other options, because I don't want you to waste your time anymore. It is more your career at this point. All of this time is very valuable.
Right.
This is the time you need to be advancing.
Yes.
I don't want to send you on a journey that might not end up landing you where you should be.
Right. Oh, wow, Trevor, thanks for bringing this up, man. When you said furious, like I felt that furious, like in my chest. I know that anger, because I hear a lot of stories. Unfortunately, it's similar to that one, and I have it makes me angry as well. I think from a perspective of being a coach, to people like that, I think the key is there's a difference between advice and support. And I try to focus on support. And part of the support is helping them redefine their problem. So is your question, is your problem, I want to get promoted at company X to vice president, or is your problem, I want to be rewarded and advanced for and recognized for the contributions I make to this multinational corporation. And so, taking that approach lets you bring in other solutions. So I try to focus on reframing, because and it's going to sound weird coming from a coach, but I don't try to change people, and that includes the people that are oppressing, the people that are keeping you back from where you want to be. That's a long road, changing a person. Changing a department, changing a company, I can help you do that. But you have to opt into it. When it's advice, it becomes something that if they're not bought in, you won't know if they're bought in or not. And if they're not bought in, it won't work, because you've built a career, I'm sure. The level of commitment and confidence and trust it takes to make it to the next level in the company, to go out and secure another position at a different company. You have to be bought into that. And so if a person is going down that path because they don't see another route, or they can't think of another way of doing it, or someone they respect suggested that they do it, they're not gonna have the right mindset to really go out and crush that. And it's not gonna work, and then it's gonna look like bad advice, right? And then there's resentment, and then there's my only option now is to go back to this horrible situation that I was in before. And so I think the key to that is helping them redefine their problem so that it opens up the solution set.
Got it. That makes sense.
Yeah, but the first step to that is kind of like dealing with your feelings about what you're hearing, because it makes me angry to hear these things, and I'm a big brother, I'm an oldest child, and it sparks this like protective kind of instinct in me, and I have to step away from that, because sometimes people have to go through a struggle to get where they need to go, and I can't you can't, even with all your knowledge and your experience, you can't usurp that. You can't sort of take them through, have them skip that part of the process that I'm sure you went through, and I definitely went through the mistakes and the running into the wall. But you can support them in kind of navigating that in a minimal effort, in a way that minimizes the pain and suffering as they learn.
Yeah, that's really helpful, and especially the second part of what you said. I know it's helpful because I'm listening to it, thinking of how challenging that's going to be for me, frankly.
Yeah.
Separating, especially given everything that's going on in the world, it's very difficult hearing these stories And being one of the only at my level, I tend to hear these stories often.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone wants to understand the answer. How did it happen? How did, this is what I'm seeing. And yeah. So I have to work on, separating myself from pulling myself out of that negative space as far as my emotions are concerned. And I 100% agree with you there. While it was a struggle, my path was a struggle. I did develop from it, and there's benefit from that too.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
Thank you for that.
Yep.
A couple things I wanted to add, if I may, is if you look at the caption right now, it says "Give negativity little to no oxygen," and I think that that's just apt because right now, given everything that's going on, we're carrying around a lot of things as employees of color that other folks might not. Other folks might see it as, that's just, what happened on Tuesday.
Right.
And so there is, again, and I'm reiterating the need for mental wellness and make sure that while we stay aware of what's happening, that we don't let the negativity take us over and overwhelm us. That's one bit. I also agree that being an eldest sibling and advising your brothers or sisters is a bit different than when you're doing in a professional setting.
Mm-hmm.
And that space is not just for the person receiving the advice, but also for yourself too. Because the history, the context isn't all there. They know what's best for them and what they're willing to invest in the decision and the implications of the decision too. So that space is really important. Again, not just for you, but for them too. And the third thing that your conversation made me think of is that it's what we call the triple burden of a minority leader. And the first one is the one that all execs and leaders have. It's just to do your job really well, right? To deliver and to continue to develop and advance. But the second one is around, once you are a minority leader, because there's so few of us, then you get a whole tidal wave of folks who want to ask for advice, mentorship, to get to know you without any agenda, because they want to see, is this who I want to be when I grow up? Do I want to emulate Trevor, or is Trevor not the person or the role that I want to do when I grow up, right? So there's that second bit. And that's a huge, huge time commitment. And part of what Jared mentioned as invisible labor. And then the third burden is around leading ERGs or leading diversity initiatives, or in the company's corporate response to horrific things that happen to a minority group. All of a sudden you now have to speak for yourself and everybody who looks for like you within the four walls and outside. What should we do? How should we communicate to our customers? How should we communicate to our employees? And all that's a lot for any human, even superhumans that become minority leaders. And so I think that the recognition is that all of that exists, and we should create space between us and the expectations, and also to decide consciously what we want to take on and what we don't. Take on the things that give you energy and joy, and the ones that don't, try to figure out a way to not feel obliged to do so, because you only have so much energy, you only have so much time. And the worst thing is if you deprioritize, the one reason why you've opted to take that role, which is to deliver, and perform in your job.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's super helpful.
Thanks for that, Hung.
Yeah. And thanks so much for joining, Trevor.
Yeah. This has
Are
been
there any
great.
follow-up questions before I prematurely cut you off?
No, well, it brings a quote to mind. I forget who said it. I think it was actually someone who was reporting to me. She brought it to me, and she said, when you get to that level, when people like us make it to that level, it's not just an accomplishment, it's an assignment. And it's that second part that feels like that's all the weight that you're talking about, the invisible labor. And I repeated it to her, because then we successfully got her to the next level. And I was like, remember what you told me? But you're right. Like, I think, figuring out what part of that assignment we want to fully give ourselves to and commit to is important as well, just to protect our own mental well-being. So thank you both. That was great.
Yeah. Appreciate you making the time and jumping on. I know the introvert investment that required. So.
Yes.
Always stretching ourselves, right?
Yes. All right, y'all.
All right, take care.
Thanks, Trevor. Jared, we have a question in the chat about the talent pipeline.
Sure.
Specifically, that people often say that there is a limited diverse talent pipeline, or that, the talent doesn't exist. It pops up periodically, but consistently. And the person who wrote it in wanted to understand, how much truth is in it, and what can we do about it?
That there's a limited, or that the reason for the lack of representation is a lack of talent. I love that. I love that argument, especially as an engineer and a scientist and a person who can do basic percentage math. It really has no foundation in fact. There's a perception that that people of color of a certain quote unquote caliber are hard to find. Then I look at my LinkedIn connections, and I look at my phone, and I look at, like, I'm surrounded by talented, brilliant people of color. What's difficult is winning them. What's difficult is creating an environment where they will want to stay. What's difficult is putting in the effort and paying attention to the unique challenges that they face and the unique perspectives that people of color bring to an organization. And when you don't do those things, you create the leaky bucket. When you overburden people of color with certain responsibilities, Trevor talked about the assignment. I think that's a brilliant way of thinking about it. When you get your new job and this additional assignment, that's something that impacts your ability. It impacts the pipeline. The current challenge is that people of color are not only within companies are not only experiencing systemic bias, but they're also being tasked with addressing it, which feels to me wrong on just a fundamental level. And I think that is probably the biggest problem with the pipeline right now. Now, when you say you want to go find talent that of a certain kind, you can't. If you do what you've always done, you will get what you've always gotten. And just as diversity initiative within the company hasn't changed in, as Nigel said, in over 30 years, recruiting approaches and recruiting tactics haven't changed in over 30 years. The definition of what talent looks like hasn't changed in over 30 years. When these things stay the same, the pipeline is going to stay the same. You can't do the same thing over and over again and expect a different result. So what we've got to do is be more intentional and fundamental in our understanding of what is required to be successful in these roles. What is needed to really be to drive impact from an experience standpoint, from an education standpoint, and focus on those things. So as long as we keep the narrow box and the narrow set of schools you recruit from, the narrow set of degrees you require, you're going to have to your numbers are going to struggle, or you're going to have to really compete. There are people of color that attend elite universities. There's plenty. if one company wanted to fill their pipeline with Ivy League people of color, there are plenty of Ivy League people of color for them to fill their company with. But you're going to have to compete for those folks. There are equally talented people in other places, and with doing other things. So you're going to have to understand how to identify those folks differently. There's a known way of identifying certain types of talent, and so it's just going to require innovation, and people are going to have to bring a different mindset to the problem, because it's not a lack of numbers; it's a lack of frankly, of imagination and of rigorous problem solving on how do we really move this number. It makes me a little. I get a little irritated.
Fired up.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that this is another good time to take a pause and do a PSA.
Sure. Sure. Yeah. So I'll tell you a bit about Coaches of Color. Coaches of Color is our newest initiative. I'm Jared Simmons, founder and principal at Outlast Consulting. Hung Nguyen is with us here. She's a principal at Outlast Consulting as well. And hi, Hung. And we are rolling out today on Jackie Robinson Day a new initiative, service line called Coaches of Color. Phase one is focused on employees of color in large companies who experience the effects of systemic bias as an individual, yet don't get the individual support they need to overcome that. So we created this program to provide one-on-one coaching to people at any level, people of color at any level of an organization. And that coaching is delivered by people of color who've had those lived experiences as a person of color in a corporate environment. We don't leverage that experience to tell people what to do. We leverage that experience to deepen the context of the conversation. So you don't have to try to explain what you're feeling or what you're experiencing or what you're seeing to the same level, because you know that person has had a similar experience at another company or in another environment. It's one of those situations where we know as people of color, I can meet a new person of color and say to them, you know how it is. And they know what I mean when I say, you know how it is. You know how it is. So that right there allows a conversation to accelerate and get to the professional development aspects of things that really move the needle, because it deepens trust. It allows people to open up about real problems they're trying to solve. And that's what we're trying to unlock here with Coaches of Color. We offer 3 different one-on-one coaching environments: guide, thought partner, and advisor. And they accelerate. They move in increasing levels of support. And those 3 levels, we have added to those 3 levels a level called trainer, which is group coaching or pre-designed webinars on key elements of professional development. So we're excited to launch it. It's 100% B2B. So our goal is to provide this service to Fortune 500 and other companies as a service, so that when a person of color says, "I'd like a coach," and they say they'd like for that coach to be a person of color, no company can respond and say, "Well, we don't have one available. We don't know where to, here are the 3 coaches you have to choose from." So we are plugging ourselves into that ecosystem so that it can widen the selection set for people of color. Not saying that every person of color will want a coach that is a person of color, but everyone deserves the opportunity to choose one.
Great. Thank you for that. We have our next guest ready to go. Our next guest is Xavier from Chicago. He wants to think through how to better realign his purpose, values with his professional choices and actually his career. So I'll bring him on now. Xavier, you're on air.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, sir. How are you doing?
Doing all right today. How about yourself?
I can't complain.
First of all, love this program. Been listening since y'all started, and I've really started to take away a lot. I've got my scratch pad and taking a bunch of notes here. So thanks, Jared, and thanks, Hung, for putting this on. There's a real need for it. Secondly, I called in because, as Hung stated, I'm really trying to think about how to realign my purpose with my work. For context, I had an employer, as you can imagine, all in this in these troubled times. Employers are taking various stances on public issues. And I got to a point where I recognized, and I'm fairly senior where I was, I got to a point where I recognized that my employer and I we had different values and they were misaligned. And it felt acutely personal to the point where I actually decided to leave my role. And now I am out and thinking about how do I now think about purpose when it comes to my job so that I feel more passionate, engaged, and aligned. And I feel like I'm going to bat with an employer that will go to bat for me. So really wanted to step back and ask, given I've chosen to forego some income at this time to think this through, that shows you how serious I am about it. I'd love some guidance as to how do I approach this challenge?
Sure. First of all, congratulations. And, I can't, you have my eternal respect and admiration for that decision, because I know there's zero external pressure to make a decision like that, right? No one said to you, you need to do this. And you walked away from a lot, I'm sure you walked away from a lot. And I know that wasn't easy. So making that decision, you have my eternal respect just for doing that. So kudos to you, man, for doing that. I think the way I would think about it is similar to what we talked before in terms of redefining the problem. So you've got a set of skills, you've got a set of interests, you've got a set of you've got something that you want to do, in a certain field, and then I would do the research to understand what companies on a macro scale are making the kind of commitments, taking the types of stances that you'd be comfortable supporting, and then using if you were fairly senior and had a strong career in your previous role. I think as a person of color, the market is very strong right now for talent. I think leveraging that to treat interviews almost like an interview for the company. Understanding, adding to your list of questions, every interview ends with, do you have any questions? Adding to your list of questions, things pointedly about how the company supports its people in the way that aligns with your values, and being clear with folks that is something you are looking at as you're deciding where you're going to work, and just being very upfront about that through the process. I think will be helpful as a framework for problem solving and thinking through this. At this point, as you're taking the space to do that, I think it's understanding where your deal breakers are. What is okay? Is it okay if a company pledges $150 million to an external company but doesn't have a diversity and inclusion program? Is it okay if they have a diversity and inclusion program but did not take a stance on any of the horrific acts of the last 12, 18 months? What really activates your moral compass, fundamentally, and just kind of getting comfortable with that, so that as you go out and have these conversations, you understand where your deal breakers are.
That's really great advice. I think that's something that I learned about my deal breakers through this process. And I think illuminating them and getting really clear on them will be helpful. any other tools or resources or ways you might recommend researching this for either of you? Because kind of at the beginning and want to be really thoughtful about not just taking what comes my way. You did mention it's a hot market for minority talent, and I've had a lot of outreach.
Yes.
So would love to think through if maybe I should be doing something more intentional than just screening away.
Again, I think, and Hung's she's got great insights on this as well. But I think the key is finding we spend time, Hung and I spend time going through through the diversity commitments of these various companies, reading their pages, looking at what they've actually committed to publicly, what that actually means. There are a lot of companies who've talked about spending up to X amount on this, or committing up to X amount on these other things. And then there are companies who said, we're going to give X million dollars to this group, X million dollars to that group. So you can learn a lot about the intentionality of a company from how the way they've expressed their commitments. The headlines are headlines, but you can dig in a bit and really understand if they mean it, or if that was to win the news cycle.
Awesome advice. Thank you so much for your help. Oh,
Sure.
Hung,
One
you have
more-
something to say?
Yeah, one more thing, John. So I think that often high achievers do what they can do rather than what they should or want to do. So one thing that I'd encourage you to think about is what are you good at? I'm sure that answer will come very quickly, because it's what people have developed you in, it's what you've developed yourself in, and it's very obvious what your deep expertise is. So that's what you can do. But the other piece that might be a bit more difficult and require some more introspection and exploration is what you want to do, because it is what you like to do, and it's also your personal passion and purpose. And then when you find the intersection of what you can do, what you want to do, your purpose, and what somebody will pay you for, then that's a really unique sweet spot for you. And once you identify that space, and there's a Japanese word for it called akiga, when you find that space where work no longer becomes work because it's what you want to do with your time and life anyways, I think that at that point is when recruiting actually happens, because right now you're just screening through all of these suitors, for lack of a better analogy, right? All these people are coming at you, but you don't really know who you want to spend quality time with. I'm going to stop analogy before it gets too creepy or inappropriate. But my point is, if you don't know what you want and need, and if you don't know what your purpose is, it's not possible for anybody else to tell that to you or to give that to you. And any role that you're going to take, you're going to do well in it, but it might not fuel, your purpose and your meaning and your soul, and it might not be a sustainable fit. Don't know if that's helpful, but it's just another perspective about what only you can answer, and then going back out into the market to figure out what matches fit.
That is incredibly helpful, and I think it reminds me to take a step back. That these are relationships, and all relationships kind of fundamentally start with you knowing what you want to get out of the relationship and how you're able to engage and what you bring to the relationship and what you value. And it's just hard to remember all of that in the midst of the day-to-day. So thank you both. This has been incredibly helpful.
Of course.
Thank you.
Anytime. And thank you for coming, Xavier. Hope the
Appreciate
weather's good in Chicago.
Take care.
Thanks. We've covered a lot of ground, Jared, and I'm really appreciating the diversity, because I couldn't think of another word, of questions from the very tactical and day-to-day uncomfortable situations to more broader and general ones about realigning purpose. How do I think about that?
Sure.
And also around, promotion and intentional advancement of your career. The one thing though is that because we have such, because of this forum, we can't really, double click and go deep in it, which is
Sure.
something that, I'm itching to do, and I'm sure our guests are looking to do too.
Right. Right. Yeah, no, I think it's been a great set of conversations. Deeply appreciative for people for offering up their challenge for the benefit of others, and it's been a great set of conversations. I have a question for you, Hung. Um, in terms of from a coaching perspective, do you have any? So I've been out and about coaching people for a while, and you've been within the company structures and things like that, coaching people. I did that for a while before. What are you hoping to get out of being a coach, like a full-time professional development expert, that you couldn't get out of being coaching people as a side thing while you're at work? Does that question make sense?
It makes complete sense. And I'll try to keep this short in terms of the
Sure.
logic, because in the past few months or year, I think that I've done a lot of thinking about my life
Mhm.
and identifying, very similar to what Xavier was mentioning before,
Mhm.
and thinking about what's important to me and thinking about what I'm good at and thinking about what I actually get paid to do
Yeah,
and how it's not always the same thing.
that's right.
And at work, the parts of the job that gave me the most energy and where I felt the most impact was really around coaching and developing people. But that wasn't core to what I was there to do. It was
Mhm.
kind of an extracurricular. And I think through a series of like personal situations and family health issues,
Mm.
I realized that, our most valuable resource is our time. And I should be a bit more intentional about how I spend my time and the decisions I make. And so that's what led me to actually quit a very, comfortable job and strike out and do something that's new. And I've grown a lot. I've learned a lot in the past few months. And I am happier because I know I really believe in what I'm doing, what we're doing, and what we're building. And by being able to focus 100% on that gives me energy. And that's the trade off from, what I left. And so, what I, long answer to a pretty direct and short question
Mhm.
about what I plan on getting out of this is I plan on A, living a more purposeful life,
Mhm.
B, getting more joy out of what I do, and three, role modeling and living the life that I want my children to take. And not specifically that they do what I'm doing, but I feel that as a first generation immigrant, there's been a lot of my career and life decisions that have been focused on financial security and a linear path towards external criteria of success,
Mhm.
what it
Mhm.
means to be successful. And I want my kids to see that there is value in being courageous and doing what you think is right, and taking those risks and taking that opportunity, because not everybody has that opportunity or privilege to do it. And if you do it, if you have it, do it.
Yeah. I couldn't agree more. Thank you for sharing that, Hung. I know it was inspirational for me just hearing you tell the story, and I know the story. So I hope that was valuable for others, because I mean you did make a big decision. I mean, you left a job that most people would are trying to aspire to do this work, and thanks for sharing your process on that.
Of course. Are you ready for our next guest, Jared?
Sure.
So our next guest is Oksun, and she comes with a very interesting question about how to raise the question and increase discussion about race in the workplace in a productive way.
Mm-hmm.
Oksun, you're live. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Hi, Jared. It's great to see
Hi.
you, and I love everything you've been doing.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Absolutely. Well, I know we've chatted before, and I think one of the questions I have, it's kind of a follow-up to one of the answers that you provided before about, what is preceding you? What's kind of the reputation? What's the model? And what are you being known for? And I think one of the questions I have is, especially for people who see a need for more conversation and more action around D and I, I think people of color experience being uncomfortable, the uncomfortability and uncomfortableness of being a minority on a very regular basis.
Right.
And, similar to Xavier, I, left my former company kind of because of this topic, because I wanted to see the conversation move forward. And my question is just, for people who haven't really experienced that uncomfortableness of, conversations around race and whatnot, sometimes bringing that conversation up is a surprise and they feel, some way about it.
Right.
And, what is your suggestion, or what's some advice that you have about bringing up this topic without being labeled as the difficult employee? Because, I hear you, sometimes you just have to walk away. It's not, it's not their problem to solve. And I get it. But, sometimes there is that just kind of weight of how to have meaningful conversations in a productive way.
Yes. Oh, Oksun, that's such a great question. I thank you for bringing that up. It is when you can't walk away, or when your conscience or your convictions won't let you walk away from a situation, or when you feel like this is a moment that could be an inflection point for a conversation, or for a community, or for an organization. I think it's important to be able to do that, to be able to have that conversation. And I tend to, and this is as tactical as I can get on this, and please keep asking questions. And calling me out.
I always do.
Yeah, I know. I just wasted my breath on that. But I think the key is I tend to engage using questions versus making statements. Because it turns the person inward first before they come back. If I say, oh, that comment hurt my feelings, or that comment was racist, or you shouldn't have said that, it will start a discussion, and it's a valid way to go. What I tend to do is say something like, how do you think that comment might have made me feel? How do you think, that might come across to a person who, XYZ? A little small, I like to use small tangential examples for these types of things because they're so heavy. But I'm from Southeast Alabama, born, raised, educated in Alabama. According to some people, I don't sound like I'm from Alabama. And people think that's a compliment, And so, there's, oh, you're from Alabama. Oh, you don't sound like you're from Alabama. How does that, how do you think that might make a person feel? My parents sound like they're from Alabama. My brothers sound like they're from Alabama. I don't know what a person from Alabama sounds like if, by definition, I'm from there and this is what I sound like. So I literally sound like that, sound like a person from Alabama. So, little things like an accent or things like that, the comments people make, I think you can ask questions to explore that. How do you think, how do you think that might make someone feel? What do you think that, sounds like to a person from, this part of the world, or from a person with this sort of a background? And then it sort of can go in any number of directions from there. But I think the key is to be brave, but to also be respectful of, I always say we have to be respectful of ignorance, because there's a difference between people who are ignorant and people who are malicious. And a lot of, I think, what we run into in the workplace is ignorance. And so I tend to try to be patient with ignorance, and patience with a lack of exposure, and use questions with that sort of thing. There are some people who are malicious, and over time you learn to hear the difference. And I don't suffer that lightly, but most of the time, if we're dealing with something, it's probably a lack of exposure or education.
No, I really appreciate that perspective about, just asking the questions first and giving them the opportunity to reflect back, because definitely if, people are not coming from a perspective of, to be, malicious, then, maybe reflecting back to them will give them that a little bit of experience, so that they can see it a little bit differently.
Yeah, I think so, and it doesn't activate the antibodies in the same way, right? It doesn't put the person on the
Sure.
defensive. I've seen people get teary-eyed and say, "Oh my goodness, I did not intend it that way. I didn't think about that." Yeah, we don't. There's a lot going on. People are complex. People are very.
I like the antibodies metaphor.
Yeah. Yeah. So does that answer your question?
It does. I appreciate it. And I think, something that you mentioned earlier too, by the way, I've been listening in the, in the back and just, listening in. And I think what you, mentioned too, yeah, some of these topics and some of these responses, or when we hear about people's experiences, it is frustrating. And being able to, check myself at times to not be frustrated, and just kind of say, hey, like, where are they coming from? What questions can I ask? And I think that's super helpful. So yeah, thank you very much.
Well, thank you. Thanks for calling in. Hung, did you have anything to add?
No, I just wanted to thank you, Oksun, for calling in and asking the question. I really, really appreciate the different perspectives, and that's what's making the discussion so robust, because they're what people are experiencing, and they're really real, raw questions that are useful. Thank you, Oksun.
I appreciate both hosting us. Thanks.
Yep. Happy Jackie Robinson Day. Take care.
Take care.
Jared, I have a anonymous question that was sent in, so we'll do that one. It's the person wrote in and said, with work from home, quarantine, and poor company morale, I am completely burnt out. I don't know what to prioritize anymore. Can you help me think through the situation?
Ooh, man, I can definitely empathize with the situation. That's for sure. Yeah, we can unpack that a little bit. Burnout has a very specific definition, and it's a condition. I think one of the things that it makes burnout particularly difficult for people of color, and probably likely, I have no data on this, but I would presume it's probably more prevalent in people of color, is because we're dealing with more. There's more to take in, more to deal with, more to tolerate. Just the effort and energy involved in tolerating bias is, I think, an underestimated sort of aspect of how we live and work. In general, in terms of when you get to that level of mental fatigue where, it's not just I'm having trouble doing things, but I'm having trouble even deciding what to do. That is a level that I think, it requires some sort of reset. And as things start to pile up, it can be very hard to see a space to create that reset point for yourself. But taking a day or a half a day, whatever you can craft to truly unplug, and ask yourself, every meeting sounds important. Every task sounds completely urgent. Sounds like it must be done, and it's going to let someone else down if you don't do it. It feels like that. But if there's a day, if you can find a day on your calendar where you can move the tasks 24 hours, you can move the meetings 24 hours, whatever, 2 days, 3 days, negotiate with folks that you owe things to, create that day of space and just unplug, turn your brain off, do things that make you happy, that engage you, not just make you happy, but engage your brain in something else. These are probably not your pursuits, but what I typically do, I took a day off, a mental health day, is what I called it, a couple of weeks ago on a Friday, and I played the piano. I did some crossword puzzles. I watched some Westerns. I did all kinds of random stuff, but I did anything that would occupy my brain enough to keep me from thinking about work. And at the end of that day, I went to bed and I slept, and I woke up the next morning with a dozen ideas on how to fix the problems that looked insurmountable the day before. So it feels like taking that day off feels impossible. But if you can find a way to sort of start to think about how you can create some space, and if a day feels like too much, do a half a day, do something to just turn the switch off and hit the reset button so you can come back and get your brain sort of re-engaged to solve those problems, because you're capable. You're smart enough. That's typically the frustrating part with burnout, is you can look at those things and know that you should be able to do them, but you just can't find it in yourself to tackle it. And I think the best thing to do is just make the space, have the conversations, do what you have to do to create the space, and just switch off and then switch back on.
Great. Thank you, Jared. Jared, we probably have time for one more question, and then wrap up. And because I'm, producing this, I get to choose, and it's going to be my question.
Power of the microphone. Go for it.
Yeah, power of the pen, power of the microphone. Jared, I want to ask you the question of, what is the impact or the cost if we don't do this? If we don't invest in advancing and developing people of color, what will happen?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the stakes are high. I think in a lot of times when we sit in the corporate world and we look at our jobs in the corporate environment, we use the term culture, and that allows us to mentally separate ourselves from society. But corporate America is part of America, and corporate in the corporate world is a society, and this is a societal problem that, if it isn't addressed here in corporate America, in the corporate world, as a macro issue, in the same way we talk about race as a macro issue in the broader world outside of corporate America. Inside of corporate America, it's labeled as specific company problems, but it's not a specific company problem. It is pervasive in the social construct within corporate America, and so with the momentum that has been created through around these horrific acts that can no longer be ignored and swept under the rug, this is the moment where we need to take that societal energy, that societal unrest, and funnel it productively into the corporate world to solve this problem at a macro level. We cannot wait for Walmart to solve Walmart's problem, and Amazon to solve Amazon's problem, Netflix to solve Netflix's problem. It's all the same problem. It's a social issue within the corporate construct. And what we have to do is find a way to create a resource that tackles this issue at that level. Left to individual companies, it's just not going to get the momentum, and it's not going to have the staying power that it could, and it's less likely to actually get at the root of what's really going on. The trick of this whole thing, Hung, and you know this, is that that it's a shared problem. We can label where the problem comes from at a broad, in a macro sense, but it has individual impact, and the individual impact is harder and more tedious and more onerous to address. But that's where it is. When your number goes from 4% to 3%, or your number goes from 15% to 14%, those were human beings who left your company, or human beings who weren't advanced properly. And those challenges can really only sustainably be addressed at the individual level. And I think right now, at this point in our society, we have the momentum to be able to start tackling this at that tedious, fundamental, one person at a time sort of level, to really break the generational cycle of, the system works for some people and doesn't for others, and we keep using the same system and keep highlighting the numbers that move a little this way or that way, but don't change in the grand scheme of things. And in terms of coaches of color, it's going to sound strange, but it may work, it may not work. I think it will work. But even if it doesn't, it's something different, and we will learn from it. And it won't be, and we will do something else. We are going to try to solve this problem right now. And that's what it's going to take, is new approaches and new ways of tracking and thinking about this issue, that we can learn new things from, and just it's a moment in time, but it's an age-old problem. It's as old as America, and so we've got to respect the deep roots that created the issue, while at the same time bringing our own knowledge. I mean, it's 2021. We know new things about the brain. We know new things about personalities. We have technology like this. We have technology. We have virtual technology and chat and things like that. We need to bring all of these new tools to bear on this problem right now, because if we don't, we know this society is a pendulum, and the attention will swing away from this, which would mean the energy will swing away from it. And we can't let that happen without at least trying to do something different to generate a different result, a different outcome.
Great. I think that was a wonderful question to end our session on. In the next few minutes, I wanted to, thank everybody for joining. And Jared, I think we have an opportunity to go over coaches of color one final time before the session ends. So over to you for that.
Oh, perfect. Okay. Yes, thanks to everyone for joining, and to everyone who tuned in that has made a contribution to this concept over the last 6 months. And thank you for your time, your attention, your thoughts, your support. This is we really appreciate it. So Coaches of Color is at its core a coaching, one-on-one coaching solution for people of color. We understand the isolation and the unique challenges that come with being a person of color in the corporate world, and we are developing a platform to connect employees of color in large companies with people of color who had similar experiences, to provide them with the support they need to address systemic bias that they experience on a day-to-day basis. We offer three levels of one-on-one coaching: guide, thought partner, and advisor. We also have added a webinar group coaching based platform we call Trainer. So we've got 4 types of engagements that we can provide. It's 100% business to business. So we'll provide a link in the follow-on email to a draft email you can send to your company to say this is something that we'd like to see happen, and support that way. But we want to make sure that companies make the investment in you, and that's the way we want this to work. The other key thing I'll say about it is it's based on our professional development platform, our framework, Think, Interact, Act, which we've been using for the past few years from a professional development standpoint. And we've just made some slight tweaks and modifications to tailor it to people of color. And we start every coaching, we start the advisor and thought partner coaching engagements with an assessment that helps employees of color understand themselves, their motivations, and the challenges that could create obstacles for them moving forward in the professional world. We're very excited to be able to do this, and as I said before, I'm an engineer. This is an experiment. We are very confident because we're not guessing. We've lived it, we've seen it, we've heard it from too many people in too many different places to not have confidence that this is something that the world needs and will be valuable. But we will continue to evolve it, expand it, and do whatever it takes to make sure that it's successful. There's no ego or pride of ownership here. We're going to do what helps to solve this problem.
So I also just wanted to jump in before we close out to thank everybody for joining us in our launch party of Coaches of Color and our live coaching sessions. Thank you for listening in. Thank you for the guests who joined and asked your questions. They're all very courageous questions that needed to be asked. And, our answers are only the tip of the iceberg. There's a lot of work necessary to really unpack it individually with different people, given their own experiences growing up, developing as a person and as a professional. It's a really exciting time for us. And, we both feel very, very passionately about the challenge, the issues, and what we are going to do about it. We can only control what we can control, and we're trying to take ownership of that and progress it. We look forward to continuing this conversation with everybody because really this is just the start. As Jared said, we're very open to ongoing feedback and tweaking this as we go because we really want to create a solution that works for people rather than a solution that we're just proud of. And to put on like in a shiny box or on a shelf. We really care about creating actionable impact in this space. So again, thank you everybody. And Jared, any last words or?
So my the only thing I always ask, if this time was helpful to folks, let us know. If it was, there's, I think we can look at an opportunity to do something else like this in the next month or so to let people. I know we got a lot of notes from people that said, oh, we can't make it, but sorry we can't join, what have you. So if this was helpful for folks and you'd like to see us do it again, please let us know, and we'll definitely factor that in.
Adding to that, if there's something else that you want us to do that would be helpful in this space, we're also very open to ideas about what would be a useful forum, discussion, or offering for folks because, again, we want to be helpful.
Yep.
So with that, I will end with a Oprah Winfrey quote below because I really am excited and optimistic. And when I look at the future, it's so bright, it burns my eyes. I'm sure Jared hates that I did that.
I love it. I love it. We have a lot of diversity in our own team, as you can see. Personality types. That's awesome. It's a great quote, and I'm excited about the future too. Just not as energetic as Hung. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, everybody, and I wish everybody a happy Jackie Robinson Day.
Take care.
Thanks. Take care. Bye.